This episode of The Biggest Table is brought to you in part by Wild Goose Coffee. Since 2008, Wild Goose has sought to build better communities through coffee. And for our listeners, Wild Goose is offering a special promotion of 20% off a one-time order using the code TABLE at checkout. To learn more and to order coffee, please visit wildgoosecoffee.com. In this episode of The Biggest Table, I welcome Isaac Villegas, an ordained Mennonite minister and community organizer for Immigrant Justice. We discuss Villegas' book, Migrant God, which explores biblical reflections on immigrant justice and Christian duty. The conversation covers Isaac's personal experiences with his immigrant family, work with sanctuary churches, and the impact of language in addressing immigration issues. We delve into concepts like solidarity, the humanizing power of meals, and the role of Christians in advocating for immigrants. The episode is rich with storytelling, including anecdotes about shared meals, the spiritual significance of communion, and projects like placing crosses in the Sonoran Desert to remember migrants who died crossing the border. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Biggest Table. I am your host, Andrew Camp, and in this podcast, we explore the table, food, eating, and hospitality as an arena for experiencing God's love and our love for one another. And today, I'm joined by Isaac Villegas. Isaac is an ordained minister in the Mennonite Church who is also involved in the work of community organizing and activism for immigrant justice. He is a columnist for the Christian Century and the author of Migrant God, a Christian Vision for Immigrant Justice. He has served as the president of the NC Council of Churches and is on the executive board of his denomination. He lives with his wife in North Carolina. So thanks for joining me today, Isaac. It's great to have this conversation.
Well, thanks, Andrew. I'm very grateful that you want to talk to me about all these things.
Yes.
Just a lot of gratitude for your willingness to talk.
No, I appreciate it, and I think I shared when I was emailing you, when my wife and I lived in Park City, we had the privilege of working with some Latinos and starting a Spanish-speaking congregation and just getting to know the migrant population there. Because Park City is a resort community, you have, they're all involved in the service industry. And so they made up 20% of the community. And we just got to know them and their love and hospitality for us. And so, it's getting to know them and getting to know their stories changes how you view migration issues. At least for me, that's how, I became aware as just being in relationship with people.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, that is exactly. I'm just thinking about my own story with my parents. My parents are both immigrants and they're alive. So I grew up in Tucson, so just on the other side of the state from where you are.
Yep.
And my mom works in the service industry, and like that's been her job her whole life. And I mean that immigrants make us who we are. I mean, that's just make me who I am, and our communities what they are, and pay taxes and fund this country and all that.
What I really appreciated about your book as I was reflecting on it is that you challenge us and force us to look at the devastating stories of migrants, but then you also give us a beautiful picture of what is possible as people are involved. Because you share some beautiful stories of remembrance and being involved in the work and what it does for our own souls. And so, it's a challenging book. It's not an easy book, but it's a book that I think paints a beautiful picture of what is possible as we adopt a more biblical imagination.
Yeah, no, that's what I was hoping to do. On the one hand, there are important biblical arguments to be made.
Right.
And there are those books out there that kind of are like the apologetics.
Yep.
Here are the biblical and theological reasons why we as Christians care for the foreigners in our midst. And, you do your Leviticus stuff, you do whatever it might be. And all of that is super important. I'm grateful that those are out there. And then on the other hand, there are those books that are just like, hey, let me give you an analysis of what has made this country anti-immigrant. And it's like history, story, like those kinds of storytelling, and also very important and super depressing. And I guess what I wanted to do is like share these stories of like good news that I've been a part of, that I've seen, and like they give me hope these stories, what communities, what people are up to. And I'm like, I replay these stories in my mind sometimes over the years. Like, this was awesome. I can't believe this is going on, that God's working in this way. And since I replay them in my head, I thought maybe I could share them with others to share a little hope, maybe. So I'm grateful that you both recognize that, like, it's tough stuff and people are doing important, godly things in the world. And I'm grateful that they're doing that.
No, for sure. And as we begin, you also, language is an important as we talk about this issue. And so can you help our listeners who may not be familiar with the language, like what language, why is language important, and what language should we be using as Jesus followers to talk about this issue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that, but you are so right. Our language isn't. So basically, like, at the end of the day, how language works for us is, I think about ethics, our ethics. Ethics is all about how we act in the world.
Yeah.
And how we act in the world is very much shaped by what we can see, what we can experience, what we can smell, taste, that whole register of who we are. And if we want to share those experiences of the world with each other, we have to use language. So this is a saying that I got from my professor, Stanley Hauerwas, is you can only act in the world you can see, and you can only see in the world you can say. And what that means is, like, our whole language, our concepts they mediate how we experience the world together. Because, we think with a language.
Right.
And so how we describe the situation of what's going on is super important for how we understand what's going on, so that we can talk to each other about what's going on, so we can figure out what we can do together. It's basically working backwards from that way of thinking about it. And yeah, I mean, two things to say on that, along those lines in the book is, like, one, just on a very personal level, like, I tried to include Spanish in the book. Because, I grew up thinking in Spanish and it's still there. And sometimes I have a hard time thinking about, like, what a word might be in English. And that shapes how I experience the world. So yeah, I include Spanish as a way. Hopefully it wasn't too off-putting. Was it off-putting to all the Spanish that was in there?
Not to me. Like, my wife's fluent in Spanish.
Okay.
I worked in the restaurant, so I have restaurant Spanish. And so like I could piece it together.
Right.
But it did, again, it hones you in. It immerses you more fully into the issues.
Yeah. So right. No, that's great. Yeah. So in general, I try to include translation, but every once in a while I don't, because it was such an experience that, like, to translate it into English or a phrase or whatever it might be, just didn't quite work. So I just let it be. But I don't, hopefully it's not off-putting. So on one side, there's Spanish in it.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yep.
Okay. And then on the other is, like, how we describe what's going on in our world in relationship to immigrants. So I don't talk about the immigrant crisis, let's say, like, that never shows up, is, this sense of, oh, we're in this crisis moment. Because crisis, I mean, there's a long history of framing immigrants, like my parents and others, as part of a threat to our national identity. I mean, this has everything to do with immigration laws, enforcement policies, all of that, and then also just the ideologies that come with it. In the 70s, people started talking, and then 80s, we're talking about the brown invasion. And so that's the crisis. It's a shift in the order of our identity, our polity, who we are. So I refrain from all that language because it plays on ethnic, racial stereotypes about, and like anthropologies and like what people are in the world is, oh, this person is a threat. They are instigating a crisis. Instead of, as Christians, we say, no, like, human beings are images of God. Like, that's our language to describe each other given by the Bible. It's like, oh, when I see you, you give me another glimpse into the mysteries of God. So there, or that we are gifts for one another. You know, that God has given us, this world is full of good gifts, and when we receive each other, we receive gifts that we need for life, for making life happen. So yeah, so language like that, I refrain from immigrant crisis, invasion stuff. I mean, I talk about it in the book, but I don't use those to say like, hey, this is what we got going on our hands.
No, you're asking people in a very roundabout, subversive way to consider, and you even say this towards the end of your book, that like we need to ponder and consider what world we live in when the best option for people is to leave their ancestral homes and risk everything at the border. You know, and that's, you know, that invites a different conversation than, you know, a brown invasion like language.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you so. Yeah, and like you basically, that is a quote you just memorized. So thank you. That means a lot to me. That was amazing. But yeah, I mean, that was from my. That's part of the story I tell at the end there of volunteering at the migrant shelter in Tijuana, Mexico. It's run by the Scalabrini Order, Roman Catholic Order of Priests. They've been there since the 80s. And yeah, I was there and I met this woman who was or is Mayan from Guatemala. And we, just like think, she was very pregnant. That was the part about it. Like she was very pregnant, and the shelter was throwing a baby shower for her. And I was volunteering in the closet, where they had all the donations for clothing for folks, and I was asked to find some like onesies, like baby wear, basically for the baby shower for her. And it was just striking this moment. I'm just like, this woman, she didn't want to leave her home. Like this is like her ancestral home. This is like her people, her identity. But because of long histories of economic exploitation related to, I mean, we could get into detail, but like basically that U.S. corn markets flooded Mexican markets and drove, you know, ancestral people lands. It just didn't make any sense. They couldn't grow and sell corn cheap enough to make a living because of U.S. corn, which was artificial. I mean, this is not a free market thing, because it's all related to the United States and tax policies, basically. It's artificially low is what ended up happening. And yeah, so it like drove her. I mean, she can't support herself. She can't support her community. So people, what are you going to do? You're giving birth to a kid? Like, I mean, come on now. Like, you just want to survive. So obviously you move. And this is not something new, actually. This is something that has happened since, I don't know, Adam and Eve had to leave the garden, go east of Eden. You know, like we're people who move. That's just what it means to be a human being. We move because of war, because of family issues, because of exciting opportunities, and that's just who we are. And here's this woman risking her life at the border with a child, an unborn child, because she had no good options.
Right. And yet in this shelter, the community rallies for her and throws her this beautiful baby shower. Because in the midst of this devastation, I don't think there's another word I can think of, like people still want to celebrate life and uphold the beauty that is coming together, you know, and having a party.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And and celebrate. I mean, this is, you know, in the United States, a country where a lot of Christians are all about, you know, providing a life society for the benefit of unborn children or whatever, you know, like to be for the unborn, that their lives are valuable. And here's this woman who is like, no, because of U.S. immigration policy, being like, no, your unborn child, we could care less. Might as well die in the desert. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's harsh. And and in the midst of that, it's despair. Like, it is depressing. It's horrible. And like you're saying, and here's a community of immigrants from everywhere. I mean, there's people there I met from like Syria, from where else did I? Oh, Somalia, Ecuador. I mean, it's just like people from everywhere, and they're like, "Hey, look, we take care of each other. We care
Right.
for people. Like this is what we are, a community of care. Here's somebody that they're having a baby shower. That's awesome. Let's do this. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's this idea of solidarity,
Yeah.
and I think it's a word that like I hadn't thought too much of, but it's a word that in the past couple months in the conversations I'm having on this podcast, like solidarity just keeps coming up as a word that we need in this time because I think it conveys something other than um, donation or
Mhm.
charity case. And
Yeah.
so why is solidarity an important word for you as you think about migrants and immigration?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I start the book with this quote that just has stuck in my mind ever since I read it from Dorothy Solle, she was a German theologian, Lutheran theologian, and
Mm,
activist, really thinking through life in Germany as a Christian uh, post Holocaust, like in the legacy of Holocaust. What does it mean to be a German
mhm.
Christian? And she just, I mean, her whole life is wrestling with political theology, all of that kind of stuff. But at the end of her life, as she was dying, she wrote this small book called "The Mystery of Death," and in it, there's this phrase, or the sentence she says, where she says, "The best translation for agape is in English is solidarity."
Mhm.
And that always stuck with me, like this sense of agape, this love that God has for us, for the world that we are invited into. What it looks like on the ground is solidarity, of
Wow.
joining lives with each other to sustain each other, to care for one another. I mean, it's just like loving our neighbors as ourselves is
Yeah.
basically what solidarity is like. As and thinking that through in terms of what it means in the midst of communities who are building bridges between immigrants and non-immigrants for a community together. And then thinking about the incarnation, that God becoming flesh as a kind of migration story. I mean,
Hmm.
that's, the title of the book, Migrant God, is like
Yeah.
that God became human being to be close to us, to be one of us. That's solidarity, that
Yeah.
migration story, that crossing the border between heaven and earth to get as close to us as possible, because that's just, God can't, that's just what God does.
Yeah.
So
Huh.
that thinking about immigration, or thinking about the incarnation as God's migrant story,
Hmm.
as one of solidarity.
Wow. No, I love how, yeah, like the best definition for like this agape love is solidarity, which I think there's a lot to ruminate on, and then to realize the incarnation is a migrant story, um, which for some evangelicals might be a hard pill to swallow. Like it's just a different, it throws a curve into how we talk and think. But he left a place and joined us, in in a far worse place, like
Yeah.
um, and then we're just past Easter and he descended into hell, like whatever that means, like he went to the pit of hell so that we could be free. And so I think, what does that mean for us as Jesus followers then, to live a cruciform life, to follow Jesus into those pits?
That's great. I actually hadn't thought about that the Jesus's descent into hell is a part of the migration story. That's great. It makes me think of another theologian that comes to my mind, is this guy Jürgen Moltmann, in his book about the coming of God. It's an eschatology about the end time, about the end of the world, about the purpose of life. And he thinks intensely, a focused way about death.
Mhm.
And his reading of Jesus's death on the cross and descent to the dead, to hell, is that in Jesus's death, in Jesus's dying, he becomes brother to all who are dead and dying.
Hmm.
So it's this other layer of solidarity there that you're talking about. And
Yeah.
yeah, I hadn't thought about it. That's good. I like that. But the evangelical bit, though, like I grew up in evangelical Christianity, and I still remember the song. I mean, they're still formative for me, but I remember, I don't know what the song is called. It'll come to me, but the line goes, "You came from heaven to earth to show the way."
Yeah. Lord, I lift your name on high, right?
Your light, I lift your name on high. Yeah, that's it. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, that is it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what we're talking about here. Is that
Yeah.
that is you came from heaven to earth to show us the way. Like that is a migration story. And then Jesus says, return to the at the right, to be seated at the right hand of the Father. Another part of that migration story, and that he will come again. Another part of that. It's like crossing all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
He's crossing all the time, crossing that border all the time.
Wow. And as we were talking about death, like there was a story in the book that you shared, and I think it was impactful for me living in Arizona because you share the story of this town of Eloy.
Have you ever been there?
No,
You
I've
probably
not
haven't
been there
You've
yet.
probably driven by it, maybe. I don't know.
Probably, but like, can you it is such a and you talk about how, coming back to the idea of language, like speaking something into existence.
Yeah.
Can you share that story just because it's devastating, but also like it paints a picture of where we are.
Right. And it's one of these things that happened where I was just like, man, you can't make this up. This is
No.
wild.
No.
So yeah, so Eloy, so I grew up in Tucson. I would drive to Phoenix all the time for soccer, basically soccer games, soccer tournaments. And so the stop, it's not even a stop. There's like a sign on the way to Phoenix as you're not quite into town for the town of Eloy, spelled Eloy. And it's in, kind of a dry agricultural area, very desolate. Never thought twice about it. And then later on, I got to know this group in Tucson called Mariposas Sin Fronteras. I think they changed their name now. I mean, Mariposas Sin Fronteras is Butterflies Without Borders.
Yeah.
And it's a prison detention visitation group. And so they, once a week go visit detainees in the Immigrant Detention Center in Eloy. The Immigrant Detention Center is operated by a private prison company called Core Civic. This is when, basically Jan Brewer, back when she was governor, started inviting all these private companies to build these prisons because she was influential in passing very immigration laws and immigration enforcement so that she knew that there was going to be a population for this and that you can make money off of that. So these private prisons emerged. And it's, like prisons are just tough in general, bad places, hard. But public or federal or state owned facilities, there's some public scrutiny. Public, it gets taxpayer dollars, all of that kind of stuff. There's a setup to help hold people accountable. Whereas private prisons, you don't have that. And so it is just like a horrible place. So we would go there, meet people. And then I was just thinking in my mind, like, Eloy, that's an interesting word. What's this? Where does it come from? And I was talking to somebody about it, doing all these trips. And they're like, oh yeah, there's this legend around here about how the name came to be. Is when they had the railroad, the stop between Tucson, I think it was between Tucson and Yuma. That's what I was told, but I don't know. I did research on this, and everyone talks about it as being a legend, but no one. There's no like origin story. It's just a legend. But basically, so a train conductor who's new to the route, there was a train stop in the middle of nowhere, and it was his first time, and they stopped this outpost, and he looks out, and it was completely desolate. And then he just quotes to himself out loud, and he says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is the words Jesus says there on the crucifix, my God, why have you forsaken me? So it's included in the Bible story. So this desolate landscape gets named Eloi as a site of crucifixion, as this is what Golgotha looks like. These are Jesus's words from Golgotha. And that's what that prison seems to be. It's a place where people are just brutally subjugated so that they, what's called self-deport. So self-deport. So these are people who have. So if you're detained, it's not necessarily because you broke. I mean, actually, I was gonna say you broke a law, but it's not necessarily that you broke a law, because to cross the border is not a criminal offense unless you do it a second time. Then it's a criminal offense. So some people are definitely, that's their offense, crossing the border.
Yeah.
But what ends up happening is like the government presses charges, and then so you have a day in court, and that takes a long time because the federal government does not fund judges. They do not like put enough judges out there. So there's a backlog. So you could be waiting for your case for like a year, for 2 years, and it's sometimes an asylum case. And the Trump administration at the first time and now didn't want people to wait that long. So when they would get arrested, even though they had a court date, they would make life miserable for them by putting them in this detention center. So they would be like, look, I just can't handle this anymore. Just send me back to my country.
Right.
That's what self-deport. So part of the whole point of these detention centers is to make life hellish for
Right.
people. Yeah. And I met a guy in there. I mean, I met a bunch of people in there, but this one man just told me a story about how he gets shifted from prison to detention center to detention. He's been in detention centers for 3 years because he just refuses to self-deport. And he has mental health diagnoses, and people don't give him the right meds. So he acts out, and it makes it even more difficult for himself. But in the midst of this conversation, he also told me that over the past, I can't remember, like 3 or 4 months, that there were 3 people who committed suicide, who died by suicide there in the prison because life was so bad. And it's just heartbreaking, like absolutely heartbreaking. Anyhow, so that's Eloy. It's the place that feels abandoned, and people abandoned by the law, abandoned by oversight. But I mean, and so this is like, I'm just going to keep on talking until you interrupt.
Yeah, no, like it's heart-wrenching, and but the stories are important. Like, again, it's keeping our focus on the stories and on the real humanity of these people.
Yeah. But this man, so the like, just so we get a glimpse of what the kinds of stories that are stuck in my head that I share in the book,
right,
is that this man, he's telling me all this, and I'm just like, how in the world do you, like, how do you keep going? Like, how do you, like, so there's this saying among subjugated people. I mean, I've heard this saying in various places among people where, like, the state or whatever political apparatus is trying to get rid of them, and them just remaining is part of resistance. And so the phrase is existence is resistance. Oh. And so, like, I thought about that with this man there. So I'm just like, just his existence here is a form of resistance. Like, and so I was like, how do you do it? How do you exist? How do you stay? Like, how do you have the strength to do this? He's like, oh no, we have to invent little things to keep us going. And so he shared with me, and this was I'd gone there. Basically, I went to Tucson to visit my parents, and when I go there, I've tried to go for Christmas, and then I try to go to the detention center. So it was right after Christmas. And so I asked him, what he does to sustain life. It's like, oh, let me just tell you the most exciting thing we did. So it's like, so do you make tamales for Christmas? And I'm like, yes, we do. I mean, that's because my mom is Costa Rican, and so we make Costa Rican tamales, and that's part of our Christmas tradition. The day before Christmas. And so he was like, yeah, well, I grew up making tamales for Christmas too. A lot of us did, but they're Mexican tamales. And so this is actually just a friendly argument among various kinds of Latinos, where we all swear that our version of the tamale is the right one.
Yes, exactly.
So for him, like, it's the corn husk tamale. And for me, it's banana leaves for us. Anyhow, so we're talking about that. But I'm just like, how in the world do you make tamales in here? Like, what do you do? Like, that seems impossible. So I was like, oh, this is what we do. We save up money that all of our family and friends send us from the outside. And then we buy Dorito chips from the commissary on the inside. And I'm like, okay, Dorito chips. So he buys Dorito chips. And so this is a bunch, like a group. Can't remember how many of them, but like him and his friends. So like maybe 4 or 5 people. So they pool their money together, buy Doritos, and then they mash up the Doritos, and that's the masa. And then they add water in it, and that's the masa. What is masa? How do you translate masa? I don't even
corn.
know.
Like it's a corn flour.
Corn flour, yeah, it's a corn flour, like bread, like it's a grainy, bready substance that you're going to bake, basically. So that's for the masa. It's Dorito chips with water in it, pulverized Dorito chips. And then for the filling, he says that at the commissary, they sell overpriced pork product. So, not quite pork product. He has no idea what's in it. So they buy pork product, and so that's the filling. And then they don't have banana leaves, nor do they have corn husks. So for the wrapping, they just use plastic trash bags. They cut these big rectangles, wrap it all up, and cook it in the microwave. They have access to a microwave in the common area. And he was just like, that's our celebration. It's worth it. And so I was like, how much money does this cost? And he was just like $80 for, oh man, I can't remember how many tamales there was, but just enough for them. Right. $80 for tamales. And that's how he's just like, we survive on like $80 tamales once a year and, friendship around the table in prison.
Right.
Oh, but it was just this moment of solidarity, like going back to that, like even in the midst of that kind of despair, people figure out ways to care for each other, to sustain each other's spirits, where a meal becomes like food for the soul.
Right. Yeah. No, and hospitality and meals is we've woven throughout your book. And you even mentioned this idea of a spiritual political hospitality, which you write, it's to invite their spirits to occupy our minds and enlist our lives in the stubborn hope for a world that doesn't yet exist. And how, and then you also mentioned that Jesus's cross points us to all the crosses in the rest of the world, which I think is that invitation to remember something despairing. And so help us understand how hospitality, first as this spiritual political idea, and then the actual hospitality, how have you seen it operate throughout your ministry?
Yeah, no, thank you for those. Those are really good. So the first point about the spiritual political act of remembrance and table fellowship. Yeah, that's where I was thinking about what communion means. And how the communion practice of the church, the words of institution in 1 Corinthians 11, where Paul says, these words I've handed on to me and handed on to you. And there's a line, which I say, when we gather for communion, the Lord's table is, as often as you eat this bread and drink from this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again. And so this sense of this communion practice, which has been the central practice of the church from the beginning. I mean, well, maybe baptism too, are kind of the two. Right. You got to initiate people into the fold. And then there's what sustains people, which is communion. And so this is fundamental to our faith. And it is about our posture towards somebody who was killed, Jesus. Which is so you proclaim the Lord's. So I'm Mennonite. We take the words pretty seriously, Bible words pretty seriously, and we get a little ornery sometimes when people add stuff to it. I mean, I'm beyond. I understand, but we say those words. But it's always interesting to me in other traditions where they add, "We proclaim the Lord's death and resurrection." I'm just right. I mean, that I understand why we want to do that. It makes sense. But to take seriously, that is the Christian posture in the world, as formed by those of us who come to the table regularly, is a posture towards a death. The crucifixion of Jesus, the crucifixion of Jesus. This is a torture. This is basically a Roman form of torturing somebody to death. Actually, that just struck me recently. This past Easter, or Holy Week, I preached Good Friday, and that image in John's gospel, the moment where after he's dead already, they have to make sure he's dead. And, it says to fulfill the prophecy that his bones wouldn't be broken. They didn't like break his legs,
Right.
so that he would fall down and like suffer, ensure his death.
Yeah.
So instead, they pierced his side, and that's where the water and the blood comes out. And I was just thinking about that. Like the mutilation of a corpse, like that is just absolute. That's a different kind of, it just struck me as a different kind of brutality this time around. Maybe it's because I've been studying a bit like what people do with human remains, migrant remains in the desert and like the Sonoran Desert down in southern Arizona, and like how they're abandoned for so long there, and just thinking about the care for the remains that people in those communities are like, they go out and find remains and care for the remains. That's part of what we do as human beings. We care for like bodily remains. But then just this cross where Jesus, after he's already dead, he's a corpse, and you just shove metal into him. Like that's just the brutality. Anyhow, what were we talking? Oh, anyhow, all of that, all of that is what we do at community. We remember that, like that is what the event is. That's what we do together. We proclaim that death until he comes again, and that should inform how our posture in the world to other deaths and to other people who are brutalized by state violence, by our violence. So that's I think that's pretty significant. And but about how the cross, how communion is a way of remembering Jesus on the cross, his death, his resurrection, but that also turns us to other crosses. That's hopefully I give credit in the book. I think I do, but maybe I don't. But it's John Sobrino's line. John Sobrino was he was a priest.
You
Jesuit
do give
priest.
credit, just
I do.
Credit.
Okay,
yeah, because I have that quote written down, and it is, I have John Sobrino written right next to it. So yes.
So it's John Sobrino, and he was a Jesuit priest in El Salvador, and he was part of that community where, this is the U.S. Funding of the dictatorial regime in El Salvador, and part of these people who are trained in Fort Benning, Georgia, not far from where the School of the Americas, trained in counterinsurgency and torture interrogation techniques. They raided the Catholic seminary there and murdered the nuns and the priests. One of the priests was this guy, Ignacio Ellacuría, who was an important theologian in Latin America. And John Sobrino was part of that community, and he just happened to be away. He was on a trip somewhere, and all of his friends, his community, he came back, they're just massacred. And so he lives his life, he develops his theology in the wake of that experience. And one of the things he returns to throughout his works is this sense of like, what the cross does is it turns our attention to other crosses today. Like we don't understand the cross until we can see crucifixion going on today and understand the mechanisms that are involved in our lives, where our society, how we've organized our lives, results in people's brutal deaths.
Yeah. And that's what you mentioned, the Sonoran Desert, and just this, I don't even know how to call it, like a dead zone almost, but people in the midst of such devastation, in the midst of abandonment, you have people going and carrying crosses into the desert and marking where people have died, because people keep track of this stuff. And so there are Christians who are taking crosses into the desert to make sure we remember and don't neglect the dead.
It's part of what human care. So I went out with it. So Alvaro Enciso I tell his story. I mean, he's just he's just one person among many, but he's a Colombian immigrant. I mean, he's been here for a long time in the United States, lives in Tucson, and he's an artist. He has an art studio, And at some point, and I can't remember off the top of my head right now how long ago it's been, I want to say it's early 2000s, he was just confronted with this reality that he came to the United States at a time when it was possible, and he was pursuing the American dream, which a lot of people do. And in some ways, he's made that happen for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And then things have shifted in terms of immigration policy, immigration enforcement. The major shift happened in '94. We can go into that if you want. But and so he developed this project, an art installation project, is what he thinks of as, and he calls it "Where Dreams Die." Mm-hmm. And what he does is he goes out, and the Pima County, which is the county adjacent to the border there, the coroner's office and the University of Arizona have developed this way of keeping track of where remains are. It's a database that's available online, and they drop like GPS coordinates wherever they find somebody's remains, and then they fill it in with all the information they can. And part of it is to, like somebody in, I don't know, Nicaragua, their, brother, 20-year-old brother left to go find jobs to send money back home to support the family.
Yeah.
And they haven't heard from them for like months. And so they just don't know if he made it. And so you scour the internet trying to find his name and to, if he died or mm-hmm. whatever. And yeah, so this is a database to help people find folks. But Alvaro uses it to go out. So he makes crosses in his art studio, and he goes out, and once a week he follows the GPS coordinates and then puts the cross exactly where that person died. And the crosses they're not ornate, but they're like very carefully, I don't want to say decorated because that feels like too trite in some ways. I don't know how to. The way he makes them is he uses it's kind of like found art, found object art as well. Yeah. So when he goes into the desert, he stumbles across somebody who's crossing their backpack, bottle, a wallet with pictures in it. Shoes, rubber from shoes, and he incorporates all these objects into the cross itself. And he uses that to make the cross because he considers all those objects as he puts them together in a cross as a kind of relic, because they remember the story of these people we've never met. And he thinks of them as, of what he's doing, what Alvaro's doing is putting together these crosses as kind of gesturing to storylines, plots in people's lives that he would never know, but are worth memorializing somehow. Yeah. And this is the best he can do. And yeah, people go out there with him, once a week. He calls this is kind of his devotional practice, he says. And people just remember the person who, a lot of times there's unidentified, but sometimes there's somebody's name and he puts the name on the cross and all of that. So yeah, it's like, what do you do in these sites of devastation? You can be overwhelmed and be like, wow, this is a brutal world. I guess this is what, but here's somebody, this is why it's stuck at, like, he's like lodged in my head as a witness. Because he's like, no, this is something I can do. Like, I can remember, I can humanize people. I can say, this person died here and that matters somehow. And I'm going to put my cross out here. And maybe some migrant might see it. Somebody who's crossing might see it, or maybe it might change the heart of a border enforcement agent about what they're up to. I mean, I don't know. He has no idea the effect of it, but it's something that's meaningful to do.
No. Right. And I love that it's something meaningful to do. And so, like, for us, I'm in Flagstaff, listeners are all over, wherever, and so, like, as we think through immigration in our local context, like, because you also encourage that worship involves liberation. And so, like, it matters for everybody, like this, whatever's happening in the immigration world right now. And we don't need to go into those details. Like, it's plastered across the news, right? Like, but how do we as Christians then live in solidarity wherever we are? Like, what are some ways that Christians can be involved, or like, what how do you encourage Christians to take a first step?
Right. No, that's I mean, part of early on in the bookmaking process, the publisher, they're great, Erdmans. They're like, all right, so what are you thinking for the cover? Like, what sounds good to you? And I was like, oh, all your covers are great. Really like them a lot. Like whatever your artists, design people have. I was like, but one thing, like, please don't put the border wall on it, because I want, like you're saying, like this is a story that affects everybody in the United States. I mean, beyond too. But I think so often when we think about immigration, maybe not now because of this recent Trump administration, but before, when I was writing the book, I wrote the book during the first Trump administration and then Biden administration, basically. And during that time, at least, everyone's just like, oh, you got to go to the border to understand it. And I was just like, no, I mean, people, like anywhere you live in the United States, immigrants make up our neighborhoods, especially in urban environments. I mean, not just in rural. I mean, I'm in North Carolina. What am I talking about? Like farm workers, you know what I mean? Like the people who are agricultural workers who like provide food for us. And so anyhow, so I wanted to be like, no, let's not make this about just the border. This is about North Carolina, let's say. So I'm glad, that also is resonant with you. And I mean, I tell a couple stories about what we've done here. I mean, I guess maybe this is part of, and it's hard when this book that I've written is so much about stories. Sometimes it's hard for me to distill into like, this is what you should do. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to. And so what I do in the book is I'm just like, well, I mean, I don't know what you can do, but this is what we did.
That's fair. Right.
So what we did here is we, I mean, a couple things is one, three things come to my mind now that I'm thinking about it. Okay, so first we did my church where I was a pastor. We offered somebody sanctuary. Like we said, hey, people need a place to stay that's safe from ICE. We will house you at our church property and defend you like non-violently. We're Mennonites. And to be trained in like civil disobedience and how to keep people safe. And we'll do that. And we did that for Rosa. She lived at church, lived with us for 2 years. I mean, that's there's a whole chapter on that, but basically in summary, during previous administrations, if you had your case was pending. So she had an asylum case pending in the courts. The Department of Homeland Security would not want to infringe upon judicial processes, or infringe upon the courts. So they're like, look, even though you could potentially be deported, we will give time for the courts to do their thing. And so she was left alone for this during this. She fled an abusive partner, came to the United States. But then Trump changed that and like flagged her for deportation. And so her attorney was like, look, we're going to win this case, but we just need some way to keep her in the United States. Because once you get deported, your case is done. Right. And so we did that. So that's one thing, is like sanctuary. And I know churches are still figuring out ways to do that this time around. The other was with, this was like a wonderful partnership among community organizing, nonprofits, and our city council, where we were encountering people who would be like the main breadwinner of the household would be deported. And then all of a sudden, like, the house you still have to pay rent. And typically it was the case that there was a mother with like a kid or two. Yeah. And like, what are you supposed to do? And so we fundraised for the Immigrant Solidarity Fund through Church World Service, our local branch of Church World Service, that would just give grants for people to pay just like basic necessity stuff like rent and food basically at the end of the day. And so that was a way to like care for people in the wake of a deportation. Like, these are family, these are also citizen kids, it's not like the line between, immigrant and citizen just gets really fluid when you're on the ground and talking to real people and getting to making friends.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing, is like financial aid to people who are in our community.
Hmm.
And then the third one I forgot. Oh, and then we also noticed that, and this was a national trend during the first Trump administration, where neighbors, when they would sense ICE in neighborhoods and they would start documenting them, they would typically kind of disperse because they were kind of afraid of being publicized, because they were operating gray areas of the law. And so we organized a rapid response teams throughout the city, so that like whenever someone would call the hotline and be like, "Hey, look, there's a suspicious looking van like pulling up along with all these cars. We're not going to go to work. We're not going to send our kids to school. Like this is because we're worried. It might be ICE." And so we would send a team out there, and like just getting in the way, of just being like, "Hey, look, we're just nosy neighbors here. What are you doing? This vehicle is not familiar. Are you ICE agent? Are you federal employee?" And sometimes they weren't, and that was reassuring for the people. They're like, "Okay, yeah, we'll send our kids to school. Or, yeah, I'll go to my job." But if they were ICE, then we would call more people, and they would bring friends, and turns into a crowd. And ICE at the time didn't like all of that publicity, so they would leave those people alone. Things feel a little bit different now. I don't know actually how things are right now, but so those are three things that we did here. I would say that the thing that comes to my mind as the most, because like sanctuary and rapid response teams, definitely on the edge of potential arrest and like civil. And I recognize not everyone's in a position to do that or wants to do that, but the thing that I'm finding right now, that where people are making a huge difference, I mean, it doesn't change the world, but helps people's lives, is actually providing financial aid to local nonprofits who are doing wraparound care for people who are, suffering in the wake of a deportation, like paying for rent, like I'm saying, or groceries, but also just like therapy too. I mean, there's a group here in Durham where it's just like a Spanish-speaking Latino-led therapy group, and meets with kids who are like processing the fact that their parent is gone, like that's so traumatic. And they need money. I mean, those groups need money to provide needed therapy.
No, and like just that care and the fear of going out right now. My wife's a psychologist and has worked and still works with some Latinos in the Park City area. And she's heard that people are afraid to leave their homes, and we've gotten emails from our school district here in Flagstaff, the superintendent reassuring that like, hey, your kid is safe to come to school. And so it's one of those like moments where you're like, what world do we live in? Where parents have to be reassured that their kid is safe to go to school. Well, I guess, one, you have to we fear mass shootings, but then also now,
oh my gosh,
like what world is where school is no longer a safe place? And I think that should cause Jesus followers to think, meditate, question, what world do we want? If we're praying God's kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven, like that's not kingdom-minded politics.
I mean, it's just like this. I mean, maybe it's not basic. I'm pretty like with my faith over the years. I feel like I've gotten more and more simplistic. I don't know, or maybe I should say like the things that are. I'm recognizing that the things in the Bible that are just so simple take a lifetime to learn and understand. But like that Jesus says, it's all summed up in two things, or one and a half, like one thing that's related to the other. I mean, it depends on which gospel, which is love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I'm learning how to do that. And it's so complicated to negotiate all the things on the ground. But at the very least, what it means is like, it's not predetermined who counts as a neighbor, like when we think Christianly about each other, maybe I should say it that way, is the first thing we do is like, oh, here is a neighbor,
Yeah.
This person, they're here. I see them. They're around. Like, I've discovered their story. They're now a neighbor. And then the question is like, how am I neighborly to them? And I just, it's wild to me that we live in a country where the first question is not like, oh, is this person a neighbor, or we should be neighborly to each other because that's what it means to be a Christian, is instead like, oh, is this a citizen? You know what I mean? It's just
Right.
like, what? That is not how we think Christianly about each other and about our world. Our first question when we see somebody is not like their category of, identity, of ethnicity, of race, of juridical status with the state. It is like, no, this person, I'm on my way. The story of the Samaritan on the way, and sees somebody. Like, it's not like the person has to be your neighbor because you want them to be your neighbor or you live by them or whatever it might be. It's just like, whoever you encounter, that's your neighbor, and the call is to act neighborly. And we can't outsource to the state, to the nation state, to the U.S. government to decide who our neighbor is. Like, that is not the role of the government. Like, as Christians, we say, no, you are wrong. You do not infringe upon our faith. Our faith is, here are neighbors, and we care for them.
Right. And the way the way to do that is to encounter relationships. Like, you have to be in relationship. And I think that's what changed for me, is when I got to know these brothers and sisters, and spent time in their home, and they spent time in our home. Like, it takes on a different life, and it's sad that it took that, versus just the recognition that, okay, you're my neighbor, I should love you. But that relationship is vital, and until you actually get out of our comfort zone and enter into those relationships, it's easy to dehumanize and to, make them the problem versus, no, they actually might be Jesus to me. Yeah.
Well, I like now that I'm thinking about it, I'm saying neighbor, and you just said brothers and sisters, but that's even better. I don't know. Yeah. What do you think about that? I was just thinking about that. I was going off about neighbors, and you said brothers and sisters, and I like that better now.
When a lot of my relationship came from, church, and being
right. Yeah.
But at the same time, and I think there was a new report I saw that, like, 60, if, the immigration policies come to fruition, 60% of those deported might be Christians or something, like, it's a huge number, right? Like that, affiliate with a religious faith, like, and so you're my brother and sister. Like, if you call your name, if you follow Jesus, you're a brother and sister. And so, like, a disproportionate of Jesus followers will be impacted if the Trump administration carries through with its desires. I like that a lot, actually. Because we say, I grew up saying, not we, I don't know about you, but like, I don't want to impose the Christianity that has been formative for me, but we grew up saying, like, some version of, the significance of baptism is that, our relationship it's like thicker than blood. Like, what happens in baptism is, like, we are made kin to each other. Like you're saying, we are made brothers and sisters to each other. And at the very least, that means we should be involved in each other's lives and care about being separated from each other. And so in my book, I do talk about, now I'm thinking about this, is I do talk about learning from my grandmother about kind of her table hospitality, her table politics, but she wouldn't use that one. But her form of, like, life around the table, where she would always invite people, like, us grandkids, but then our friends. She always had food for us, and we'd be like, oh yeah, stop by. I have my arroz con pollo here for you. And, like, her way of table fellowship, her posture towards the world, where it was like centered around this table and feeding people,
made it so that like all of our friends became by extension kind of part of her family.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. No, and I remember when we were in Park City and there was a Latino couple that if I went away for a conference, like they would always bring a meal over to Claire and the girls.
Yeah. Right.
And like, and this wasn't like they had twins who were younger, like it's not like they had the space or the margin to provide this meal, but their way of being was just, no, like, we'll take care of your wife for you, Andrew. Like, don't worry about it. Like, we got her. And you're like, none of the Caucasians or white people would ever think about that. Sad. I don't think, or like, I remember we got invited to one of their birthdays and it's us around the table and I'm the only guy that doesn't speak fluent Spanish. And so like they helped me understand and but like I remember leaving that night thinking this was one of the most enriching experiences and parties I've been part of, and because it was just, I don't know what it was, but it just, my heart was warmed. Just being with them. And it just changes the way you see the world.
Yeah. No, that's great. You're talking Emmaus Way language in Luke. I mean, but that is the story there is this, the post-resurrection story of Jesus, like the two disciples, Cleopas and his friend, they're like, what in the world's going on? We just had all this crazy stuff in Jerusalem. They're walking home to their village of Emmaus. And all of a sudden the stranger shows up.
Right.
Who like eavesdrops and inserts himself in their conversation. And it's in Luke's gospel, the word there for stranger, I mean, it gets translated a lot as stranger. But in Greek, it's parokeo, and it means foreigner, that kind of stranger.
Yeah.
Like extranjero in Spanish, like a stranger, but it's extranjero is somebody who's like foreign to you.
Right.
And, depending on what Greek lexicon you use, it gets defined something like somebody who is in a place where they don't have documentation or don't have alien status or are not of that nation or whatever it might be. And so here's this foreigner who shows up and inserts himself in the conversation. Like, what are you talking about? And Cleopas is just like, are you the only foreigner who does not know the things that have happened?
Right.
And then they recount the story.
Yeah.
And then this person just keeps on talking with them and chat. And then finally it's like late and they show up at their house in Emmaus. And they were like, hey, look, you shouldn't walk back alone. How about you just stay with us? And so I say, okay. And so he goes inside. And then my favorite part of the story is it says that they're gathered around the table. And then, this stranger, this foreigner, takes their bread.
Right.
It's so wild to me because it's not like they serve him food because they're in their house, but he like raids their refrigerator or pantry or something. I don't even know how this happens, but it says he takes their bread and breaks it for them. And then this breaking of the bread, their eyes are opened and they see that it was Jesus. And they say, "We're not our hearts strangely warmed."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
I heard you.
You heard that. You said those words, and that's where.
No, and I'd heard you talk about that story on another podcast, and just it's one of my favorite stories because Jesus is recognized in the breaking of bread. Like, you talk about somebody who wants, as I think about food and spirituality, like Jesus is recognized in the breaking of bread, but like to recognize that he is classified as a stranger and alien in their midst, like that takes on a whole new like ramifications, for neighbor. And you're not just talking about an acquaintance, who was around, you're talking about somebody who is from a different country.
And I think maybe the part that gets me too about it is, again, with him taking their bread and offering it to them in their house. Just thinking about the logistics, I would be so put off if somebody did that. Because I really like to make food for people and like care for people in my home, and I get pleasure out of it.
Right.
But if someone were to like interrupt my idea of what the meal should be, I would be like, wait a minute. Anyhow, but that I think also what it does is it messes with our categories of hospitality and who counts as guest and host, and how those things so easily flip around on each other, and they're not as stable categories as we like to think.
No.
I mean, thinking back to Rosa when she was in sanctuary at our church, just comes to my mind is like she loved to cook. And so we figured out like one of the ways that it was a way for her to both like be there with us and have something to be involved in community life, something she could do. And also in terms of like making some money, she would do this for outside groups, but she would use the kitchen there at church to make papusas, which are, I did not grow up with papusas because that most of the stuff that I grew up with was like Mexican cuisine, Costa Rican, and Colombian. But it's Central American masa, thick tortilla, gordita style with like filling, like beans or something, or pork in the middle. And so she would make papusas for us for like community meals, for church. And so it's just this really interesting moment where she was guest, right? Like, I mean, when we think about it, our church was offering her hospitality. We were hosts, she was guest. But then at the same time, like I would go home after church. She wouldn't. Because we, converted an office space into her apartment. So it became her home.
Huh.
And then she would make meals for us. And so it was always striking to me. I'm just like, I actually don't know if in coming to church, I'm now coming to her house.
Right.
She's the one who's here and she's letting us use the space. And, but then she's negotiating us and we're all there. And then like meals happen and she's making us food. I don't know. It was just this moment where I'm just like, this is all like very strange. Everything's flipping around in my head and in my life.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's what meals does, is it blurs that line. And I think you even mentioned it that, as we think about immigration, shared meal blurs the line of borders. Like the borders no longer matter because we're kin. Like, and that's, we're not always called to be hosts. Sometimes we're called to be guests, and to enter into their life, and what is in store for me as I bring a guest mentality, and am open-handed, with the relationships versus always wanting to be host.
Yeah, I don't really talk about this in the book, but now that you're talking about it, it is something that I do believe is in this conversation about immigration is that I think migrants are evangelists who are reminding us of the gospel that we don't own our lives, that our lives belong to God, that we live by grace. Like we do not make ourselves. Like despite, I mean, that's the American mythology is that we make our own lives, we build ourselves by our own bootstraps, we work for what we got, etc. But it's like, no, like we're born from other people. You know what I'm like, quite physically, we do not come into this world on our own. We are made by others. We are given this life and we're being sustained every day by people beyond our recognition. I could not survive on my own. Like I'm made by others. And what migrants remind us of is that like, that is the Christian disposition, that we are, oh man, what comes to my mind, I can't remember which Psalm it is, like maybe one in the 130s, but the first line is, the earth is the Lord and the fullness therein. And this understanding that like, no, the world doesn't belong to us. This house does not belong to me and my wife. This is God's. and at the moment where I think of it as my possession, that is not thinking Christianly.
No.
That like, this is the place that belongs to me. That, that's when mammon is starting to take control of our lives and how we think about each other and our spaces and ownership. And so the sense of like migrants as evangelizing us is this sense of like, what does it mean to be radically dependent on God so that you can live in the world and hold things loosely and to say like, look, I am at people's mercy. And that's how we should all be, maybe.
That's a great word. I want to keep going, but I also know like time, like this is, but it's a question I'd love to sort of ask all my guests, and it's one helps summarize stuff. But what's the story you want the church to tell?
The story. This is where like all the things that I learned as a kid in Sunday school, I still realize I'm trying to understand.
Hmm.
I haven't figured, but that God so loved the world. I mean, it's
Right.
basically the mission of the church is
Hmm.
like that's what it's about. That we have this life because God loves us.
Right.
And um God, to be in that relationship with God is one where we learn to love this world the way God does.
Hmm.
Um yeah, I think that's how that's the message I think that we're about as Christians, is to say like God so loved the world.
Yeah.
That's
Hmm.
for everybody. And maybe the most profound, um the second thing that comes to my mind, it's not really like a mission, like a something we need to be doing, but just to realize what this posture means is that moment that I'm still trying to figure out how radically profound, I mean, my words are, I'll just say the line, but it's when Jesus, they're sharing a meal with the Last Supper in John's Gospel, and then he washes their feet. I always get a little weird, squeamish with the fact that he washes the feet first and then eats. I'm just like,
Yeah.
why don't you eat first and then like mess with them? But no,
Yeah.
I get it. Like you do,
Yeah.
you wash the feet because people go, but but it's when he's washing their feet, and after all that, he says to them, "I no longer call you servants, but friends."
Hmm.
And that maybe that like going back to solidarity, to bring it back to the beginning, is that what solidarity means for Jesus is like becoming friends. So maybe
Yeah.
it's beyond neighbor. It's like God has become our friend. I no longer call you servants, but friends.
Right.
And
Hmm.
friendship is this two-way street where we discover, we're bound together in joys and sufferings,
Yeah.
and celebrations and heartache and all of that. But it's like a friendship that God has made us. How do we become friends with God?
Yeah.
Like that's wild to me. Anyhow,
Hmm. Wow. No, I love that. Um, yeah. Thank you. This has been a treat and a privilege. Um, and some fun questions to wrap up,
yeah.
just because it's about food.
Oh
So,
yeah.
what's one food you refuse to eat?
I have refused to eat escargot.
Okay.
I've been in France and I've been served it, and I'm like, I got to do this, and I just couldn't do it, and I felt very
Okay.
badly. Yeah.
Fair enough. Then on the other end of the spectrum, what's one of the best things you've ever eaten?
Whoa, best thing I've ever eaten. I've eaten so many good things. Best thing I've ever eaten. I mean, the thing that where my mind is going. So whenever I go back to visit my family in Colombia, they make, it's a very simple meal, but it's like the worker's lunch basically.
Hmm.
It's like you have time and work where you go home, like if you're in the
Okay.
city, let's say, or
Yeah.
not even elsewhere too, you always go home to eat your lunch with your family. So everyone is there eating with them. So we have lunch together, and it's typically like a sopa, like a soup, a caldo, like that's
Yeah.
pretty basic, but the caldo is delicious, the soup itself. But what makes it the meal is that there's all kinds of like fixins on the table.
Okay.
So you have like you might have in the soup, there's probably a like a chicken leg, let's say,
Yep.
some kind of chicken, um, and then you have like maybe some starch, like yuca or potato or something like that. But
Yeah.
then you have all this other stuff that you add in, like it might be other
Mm.
kinds of potato or yuca or vegetables, and you just basically kind of build your own soup off of that
wow.
base, and it's absolutely delicious. It's kind of my trouble with eating really good food is that typically it's like I can't stop eating it, and then the more I eat, then I regret it a little bit. But
No.
with
Yep.
that soup, it like fills you up,
Right.
and you don't feel bad afterwards because like, oh,
Yeah.
you just ate a bunch of soup with vegetables in it. Anyhow,
Yeah.
so that's probably. But
Okay.
it's also with the people, like the
Yeah.
meal with the, and then having that people like with family, and I don't know,
Yeah.
that's where my mind goes.
No, I love it. No. And then finally, there's a conversation among chefs about last meals, as in if you knew you only had one more meal to enjoy, what would it be? And so if Isaac only had one more meal, what might be on your table?
One more meal. Again, I would probably go. This is very basic. It's what I grew up with. Oh, you might even know this kind of. Do you know the Sonoran tortilla? Like, there's a particular kind of tortilla
I don't.
in the Sonoran, like in the southern part of Arizona, and then down into Sonora, Mexico. Well, anyhow, so I would love a like pretty simple bean and cheese burrito made with that tortilla, because I don't want too much of the filling to distract from the tortilla. But this tortilla is like super thin, elastic, like very stretchy.
Okay.
And it's always made with like a little bit of oil, so your fingers get a little bit. It's only whenever I go back to Tucson, I actually bring them back with me because I can't find them anywhere else.
For sure.
But yeah, it's that Sonoran tortilla with beans and bean and cheese burrito.
Yeah, I love it.
No, I'm so basic.
No, but like a fresh baked tortilla. Like, there's few things in life that are better. Yeah. No. Well, thank you, Isaac. This has been a privilege, a joy. Love your work. And if people are interested, obviously they need to buy and read Migrant God. But where else can they find you, connect with you, learn more about your writing and your work?
Yeah, I do have a Substack. I think it's called Migrant God. It's how the book first started. I started doing a Substack that I'm going to start ramping up again here in a bit. So if people want to join that, that'd be awesome. But yeah, Andrew, thanks so much for having this conversation. I've really enjoyed talking with you and like your thoughtful questions. And I don't know. Yeah, I felt like I was insights were happening in our midst, and I was very grateful for that. So thank you so much for inviting me onto your show and chatting with me about the stuff that I care so passionately about.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, leaving a review, or sharing it with others. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Biggest Table, where we explore what it means to be transformed by God's love around the table and through food. Until next time, bye.